Right. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, partners. I'm happy that we have this gathering today to provide solutions, not just to share the challenges, although that I'll be doing that in a moment, but what we're expecting from our distinguished panelists today is to provide solutions to the funding gaps, to the technical gaps facing us when we're trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Mahmoud Muhiddin. I'm Senior Vice President at the World Bank Group. And I'd like to share just a couple of references on the kind of challenges we are facing and how the distinguished panelists today are going to help us in dealing with these challenges at the local level, national level, and indeed at the global level. So when we started the preparation for the spring meetings, we had this impressive speech by the managing director of the IMF, Madame Lagarde, titled "A Delicate Moment for the Global Economy," about the slow growth we are facing. But she didn't leave us without solutions. She emphasized domestic policies, enhancing inclusive growth, fair cross-border trade and investment, and global partnerships. And of course, she offered some suggestions on how the IMF could be of help. Then, a few days after that, many of you may have attended or read the first speech of our president, Mr. David Malpass, who said again, global growth lost momentum, so from a delicate moment of the IMF to a lost momentum of growth throughout 2018. He emphasized some warning signs, waning effects of stimulus measures in major economies, financial stress in some large emerging markets, and elevated policy uncertainty globally. But he didn't leave us without solutions, with a focus at the country level on infrastructure finance to support those who are in need of funding and leveraging the private sector. I think he was outlining the elements of the capital increase in partnership with the private sector, doing more with for women and with women entrepreneurs, and especially in fragile and post-conflict situations. Then finishing that, I was reading the good speech of our DSG, Madam Amina Mohammed, who reminded us again that the clock is ticking towards the 2030 deadline. And I think in more than one case, we are not necessarily on track. So this event, which is co-organized today with the help of my good colleague and friend, Jayla and her fantastic team, and Vitor, and both of them will be speaking today, is basically about providing solutions. And there is no better than our CEO, who is responsible for the implementation for the capital increase, for finishing the job of IDA 18 and preparing us into IDA 19, which has the subtitle Towards 2030. But before coming here, I was sharing with her a summary that was going to be extended through the eloquent way of Ambassador Blanchard, of a meeting that we just have with 70 people in the room. I think our treasurer was counting the trillions of dollars. I think we reached something like $20 trillion plus from private sector and asset managers. And I'll be sharing with the CEO the names and the contacts, and with her fantastic follow-up, along with our colleagues from the Treasury, from the IFC and MIGA. I think we can be doing a good job in attracting more private sector solutions and finance to the SDGs. Having said that, I'd like to start with our CEO, who did a fantastic job as an interim president of this institution, and under her good supervision, we had this session prepared for the first time in that way, with good collaboration with our colleagues from IMF and the UN. And this is the list of the private sector people that I like to share with the CEO for future reference. And I know you will be contacted by her very able teams who get prepared. Now, without further ado, please join me in introducing and acknowledging the CEO of the World Bank. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How is the mood? This is the most important place and topic for all of us, because what we are discussing is how we are going to meet the aspirations of all people for a world that is prosperous, fair, and sustainable for future generations. We call this world one in which we have achieved the Sustainable Development Goals. Amina led us to define them, and now we all have responsibility to get there. But as we sit in this beautiful place today, the likelihood of meeting the Sustainable Development Goals on many counts is not very high. Let's start from the key Sustainable Development Goal number 1. We have determined that we want by 2030 for extreme poverty to be brought down to 3%. If we don't change something in our equations, it will be at best 6%. And that is only half of the story. If we don't count sub-Saharan Africa, the world as a whole will be at 2% extreme poverty. In sub-Saharan Africa, we will be somewhere between 25 and 30%. That cannot be. It cannot happen. At the World Bank Group, we are now equipped with significant firing power, thanks to our shareholders and our donors. We are in the best financial position we have ever been. We have received a record high replenishment of IDA, $75 billion for over 3 years, the highest in our history capital increase, 50% increase of what we can do. That translates into $100 billion a year between now and 2030. But that is not going to be even remotely enough unless this money leads to 3 things. 1, good policies in countries, so they manage their own budgets well and align them with the Sustainable Development Goals. They are transparent and accountable to people. They are able to mobilize resources from markets, and the private sector flourishes, creating jobs and opportunities. 2, unless we direct these funds for economic transformation. Today we had a great event on digital economy for Africa. Has anybody of you attended? Yes? Well, it was really fantastic, because if we get Africa to leapfrog in the digital economy, then our dream for no poverty can be met. We are committing $25 billion over the next 10 years for digital Africa, and we commit to mobilize $25 billion from private sector sources. So you private sector people on this list, help us to get Africa to be digital. Last but absolutely not least, we have to do that together. We rely on partnerships, and in that respect, I want to recognize, in the spirit of digital, the UN Secretary General led task force on digital financing of the SDGs. Jayla, get up. Our Vice President, Jayla Pazarbaşıoğlu, is our representative. It is very exciting to work with all of you, with civil society, with private sector, with partners in governments. And yes, we can get there. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Very specific solutions requiring partnerships and dedication with a focus on delivery, especially in Africa, and providing digital solutions at the same time. So let me ask now our main speaker in such events and leader of development agenda since the very start, the days 2012, and after, when the agenda was called the post-2015 then, Ms. Amina Mohammed, the UN Deputy Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. This is amazing. The people in this hall, the expertise, the commitment, this is what we need. This is what we need so that we can share with you the possibilities. Challenges we know about, and we brought many a solution to it. So it's wonderful. Activists like I, we love the echo in this room. So hello, everyone. There's not enough young people. But appreciation to our colleagues in the bank. It's always a great opportunity to come from New York and to really share what we're doing with that common ground to try to end poverty and achieve the 2030 agenda. 17 incredible goals, and it took us 4 years to shape them. And we shaped them not in the bowels of the UN, but with the World Bank, with civil society, with the private sector. And 4 years on, with this roadmap, we have a stock taking, and it's mixed. For one, we can say good news, we're engaging. Everyone is engaging with the SDGs around the world. It truly is a universal agenda. What's not so good is that we're not achieving it fast enough, so we need a whole dose of urgency to get to the scale that we should. I want to bring it down to a level where, unless we are speaking at that level, we're not going to move the needle. And that's the vehicle that we have of national budgets. And everyone in this room, I'm sure, has had some connection from those from our countries and those who work with our countries on national budgets. This is where it will happen or it will not. Today, no matter what we do in terms of support at countries, it is the domestic resources that are doing what they can do, where it is almost impossible, and sometimes the competing demands make, for many heads of state and government, choiceless choices. Do I do education? Do I do health? Do I provide water and sanitation? Or do I think about how to invest in my economy? So really important that we have a robust discussion around how we can invest in those budgets. And with the 2030 agenda, this is one that means something for everyone. I say that national budgets already implementing the SDGs. They're just not doing it very well. And we've not been able to articulate what that looks like. And so SDG-related expenditures in our budgets need to be seen in the economy, how we grow inclusive economies, how we attend to the revenues that we get, to make them much more inclusive, that are paying for education, for health, for reducing poverty, providing the jobs that we need. And of course, today we talk about greening our economy. And that we hear much of the opportunities but perhaps not so much of the urgency and the scale that we need to go to. Mahmoud had the roundtables at lunch today on how to bring those private investments in. And we certainly had the private sector in the room. In fact, they've been more in the room than perhaps we have in many places on the SDGs over the last couple of years. But it hasn't opened up the billions to trillions. And we have to ask, why is that not happening? I'm gone to zero now. We need to deepen the partnerships. And we need to understand better how these partnerships will work out at the country level. We speak much at the regional, much at the global, but at the country level. The value proposition for us is about prevention, preventing any more crises than we already have. But it's also about transition. The solutions that we provide help us to come out of a humanitarian crisis, cross the bridge of sustainable development to sustain peace, to ensure that women know that they have a place at the center of our economies and is inclusive, to bring an end to violence, to ensure that children have a chance at an education and a future. And so for that, I would say, last but not least, the solutions do lie in our young people, and especially our women. And so think about how, as we discuss national budgets, what would the results be in their lives, and how can they participate, not in the future, but today, because that's what counts. This is their future being laid out today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists.
Right. Thank you so much. We spoke about many challenges. One of them that we need partnership now to solve, which is the time management. So we have a video that I hope will run for around 3 minutes. And the DSG raised a question about why we're not getting the leverage right so far, why the mechanisms towards the solving the billions limitation to the trillions availabilities that we need is not really happening yet. And perhaps I may ask the president of EBRD to provide some sort of suggestions on how to get us into that, along with some other speakers during the sessions. But now we'll listen to Madame Lagarde in a recorded video that I think ran for less than 3 minutes when I checked it. Let's go.
Well, first of all, congratulations, and thank you so much to the World Bank for holding this very important seminar, SDGs in Action. We at the IMF have done some homework in order to identify and quantify the fiscal efforts that will be needed, and to really sort of figure out how much will be needed. So we've built a model, and we've concentrated on health, education, and a selected number of infrastructure. And we've applied that to all 49 low-income countries. And we come up with a big number, which is $500 billion that will be needed in order to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, only those that I have mentioned. So how will that money be collected? We believe that countries themselves can actually achieve a lot. And let me just give you 4 particular conditions that in our view should be satisfied for that money to be raised. Number 1, countries have to focus on sustainable and inclusive growth. Number 2, they need some fiscal capacity. Number 3, they don't need to spend so much more, but certainly so much better. And number 4, they also need to make sure that they have good and transparent governance, because those will be key for the private sector to take an interest and to complement the funding. And those will be key as well for aid money to join this effort. Let me tell you now what the IMF will actually do. The IMF will continue to support countries in each of the areas that I have mentioned. For instance, we have increased our capacity development on strengthening tax systems by 41% over 3 years, with large increases also in our support for fragile states. We are also expanding our engagement on governance and corruption issues, given the cost that weak governance imposes on growth. But clearly, all the efforts have to be made by all concerned. countries themselves, international institutions, the private sector, and certainly all the donors who can also help by reducing the volatility of aid and by ensuring that allocation of aid better reflects recipients' SDG needs. The bottom line is that achieving these SDGs will require that strong partnership, all stakeholders, all hands on deck, and we will be a strong participant, believe me. On this note, let me wish you a very productive seminar and very good work.
Right, many thanks to this message from the Managing Director of the IMF. Now I'm happy to introduce Sir Suma Chakrabarti, who had been very much involved from the very beginning on supporting the SDGs agenda through finance, solutions, innovation, partnership with the private sector. But I think we have a critical question from the DSG that I encourage you, sir, to help us answering it. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud. I'm delighted to be here amongst friends, even a friend like Amina, who as soon as I sat down said, you are the endangered species here on this panel. So I'm the token guy, I guess, for once, which is good to see how the panel has changed. I'm really pleased about that. Look, I think the serious note here is we can be as passionate as we like about the SDGs. I am very, very passionate about them. But we are off track. And we are really off track. And this is an urgent agenda. We've got 11 years to go. We know that these SDGs, they describe in their entirety the whole nature of the development problem across all the countries, not just low-income countries, but all countries. And we know, because we said this at Addis, that it's important to have national resources involved. It's important to have grant aid involved. But that isn't going to do it. And you've got to somehow leverage in private sector financing and delivery. And for us, therefore, at EBRD, this has become center stage for us. And this is what we do. This is what our business model is about. We are focused on the private sector. At least 75% of our lending per year, on average, goes into the private sector directly. So this is very important for us. Now, in terms of taking this forward, what I wanted to really tell you about is something that I think can be scaled up, not just by us, with IFC, with other MDBs too. And my example is going to be one from Egypt, which became last year our #1 country of operations in terms of investment level. And I see Saha Nasser, my friend here, is in the audience, and so she may well want to add to this. But SDG 7, clean energy. This really answers the point about how to get the private sector motive. What is the private sector looking for? Well, #1, it's looking for a regulatory, a legal environment that is consistent, that is for the long term, that won't get chopped and changed, that will make them take long-term investments. That's the first thing we did. So in the case of Egypt, we worked on the whole renewable energy framework with the Egyptian state and government and really developed it first. Once we got that into the right space, and at the same time the Egyptian government was taking action on energy subsidies, trying to reduce them as well, to change the incentive pattern, it meant we could actually attract a huge number of private sector investors to what is now heading to become the biggest solar park in Africa, in Benban in Upper Egypt. We've invested in 16 projects there with foreign investors who would not have come if it hadn't been for first upstream work on the policy environment, exactly as Amina, Kristalina, and Christine said earlier. That has been such a success that we were able to then help bring in other multilateral development banks to join us there, but also more and more private sector players too. So that is a way of doing it. And the net result of that, of course, it's taken the pressure off the Egyptian state budget as well, not to have to do this. But that is a great example. The reason we're off track is we haven't got enough of these great examples. We need much more action on this front. We at EBRD would like to scale up. We have a target in this area to get to 40% of all our investments by 2020 actually being in the green economy space, dragging in private sector to help us with it. We're well on track to achieve that, but all the MDBs need to act on this front and maximizing financing for development in this way. That is the answer. So I think it's really hard work, but it's really worth it. And you can mix that passion with a real chance of achieving that goal. And remember, tick-tock, it's only 11 years away. We need to act now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. You'll be happy to know on the endangered speeches that our CEO guaranteed at least one man for the panel. So now we have one man sitting, one man standing. Yeah. Right. Okay. So Sri Mulyani, you have been at it in different capacities. Managing Director of the World Bank. Now you are leading finance of a big country, a G20 country, with many reforms, many challenges need to be solved through partnerships. So what lessons can we learn from you?
Thank you so much, Mahmoud. It's really a pleasure for me to be here again in the bank. It's always feel that you are going back to your family. So it's also good to participate in this very important topic, integrating sustainable development goal within our national budget. As the previous speaker all mentioned about how important to implement SDG with strong partnership, Indonesia is going to also do our homework as well as our part. This is a commitment that requires all of us to move into an action. And that's why global partnership is a key for the SDG implementation. I will give you maybe a couple of examples how the Indonesia tried to mobilize partnership in order for us to implement SDG as not business as usual within our development program. First, to scale up the ambition to achieve the SDG goal, which is around 6 trillion as mentioned earlier by our colleague, we need to always mobilize not only government, public money, but private sector, or even in this case, philanthropic money and foundation. And that's why Indonesia is initiating a blended finance initiative. This is an initiative in which Minister of Finance, through our special mission vehicle, creating what we call it SDG Indonesia One. This is the platform for our own public money combined with the equity on state-owned enterprises to attract more private capital as well as philanthropists to achieve SDG. And with this blended finance scheme that then can be provided for any risk preference of our partner, we provide partnership based on various forms. They can inject through equity, they can also give borrowing. If they want to provide grant, that can be also blended, or they can also provide technical assistance or capacity building. So these are an open, complete platform that will fit with the risk appetite as well as business modalities of potential partner. This week, I actually arrived earlier and I spent one day in New York. I invited a lot of Indonesian philanthropy because Indonesia have 1% or 5% rich. They actually start to build foundation and philanthropic activity. I convened the meeting in Jakarta before, and now we invited them to come to New York to meet with Bloomberg philanthropic activities. So former mayor or Bloomberg himself hosting us a meeting 1.5 days, and he also invited some philanthropic from the United States in order for the Indonesian Philanthropic Foundation learn from how the United States philanthropic activity that usually use the business model of blending their money with maybe multilateral development bank like World Bank and public money to get the highest impact. I think this is one of the concrete form of how we put the SDG partnership into action. And for Indonesia, SDG Indonesia One, which is a blended finance scheme, we are able to mobilize 2.46 billion through this platform. This is the platform in which government agency, development bank, commercial bank, climate fund, equity investors, insurance company, and local as well as international philanthropists to put the money, and they can choose which SDG that they want to support. The amount will continue increase, and I believe as there is a huge enthusiasm from development partners, as well as now private sector and philanthropists. The second concrete to put SDG in action for Indonesia is to create a financing instrument. In this case, the government of Indonesia introduced Islamic finance product to provide as a tool for raising a type of funding needed to support SDG. What we introduced is a development of Islamic finance product that is sukuk, and raising in the global capital market, and we've been very successful in raising this funding. Sukuk has been an essential part for our Indonesian budget financing source in the past 5 years. And sovereign sukuk in this case has enabled us to diversify our financing source so that we are going to tap a much wider investor as well as different risk appetite and also a diverse instrument. We also introduced sukuk in achieving the SDG goals and also link this financing through this sukuk with a project financing that support SDG. In 2019, Indonesia issued 750 million 5.5 years green sukuk together with 1.25 billion 10 years sukuk. The green Wakala sukuk issuance marked the first green bonds from Indonesia and Asia, and the green sukuk is the first issuance under our recently established green bond and green sukuk framework. So this is the second example of how we put SDG into action through innovative financing as well as innovative instrument. Lastly, I would like to say that to put SDG into action, we mainstream our development plan as well as our budgeting, putting into account the SDG within our planning as well as budgeting design, which Amina mentioned earlier. What does it mean? I think from the government budget design, SDG can be internalized or built in, whether this is through the revenue side as well as spending side and financing side. On the revenue side, the domestic revenue mobilization, which is mentioned by Mahmoud and others, is very critical. And that's why Indonesia is launching and continue pursuing tax reform and doing a synergy to make sure that the loophole on the tax collection can be closed, and we are going to collect tax more in a more efficient and less distorted way. On the revenue side, we also use tax in order for us to create tax incentive for company who will also commit to work to achieve SDG, whether this is on education as well as research and development, and also in health sector. On the spending side, on our budget, the commitment on the SDG translated into the allocation or appropriation of our budget. Indonesia have a constitution who mandated us to allocate 20% of our spending for education. So this is a commitment which is secured by the Constitution. The challenge is how we are going to use these resources in order for us to be able to achieve SDG goal related to education. We also spend 5% of our budget on health. Again, this is also to achieve universal health coverage and also addressing the issue which is very critical like stunting. We also use the safety net on the spending side in order for us to be able to continue reduce the poverty and creating a better equality within the society of Indonesia. So these are all the areas that the government using the budget tools on the spending side in order for us to achieve the SDG. On the financing, I've already mentioned earlier. Last thing, I would like to say that for SDG to be achieved, the economy needs to be healthy and creating more private sector. And that's why investment climate is very critical. We continue improving the Indonesian economic policy and investment climate. And Indonesia is among the reformer who can achieve a jump in the doing business score as well as global competitiveness index. These are all based on the policy platform as well as reform in the administrative and bureaucracy to simplify the investment procedure. Right. So these are all hopefully can provide you with an example how a country like us implementing all the policy regulation and innovating financing and instrument in order for us to be able to achieve the sustainable development goal. Thank you so much.
Many thanks. Thank you. Very good examples. Government, philanthropy, and a bit of localization as well in the work we are aware of. Right, so I've been very much encouraged by many of my British friends in the audience and the Europeans to ask the Honourable Minister some soft or hard questions about an issue that I will not raise. So now, with the great role of the UK in international development, and that was demonstrated as well to us yesterday through your participation in an important event related to the cyclone-affected countries. We need to know more from you what the UK and DFID in particular are doing in the different areas related to finance, data, transparency, and the implementation of the SDGs. Honourable Secretary, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief because I know you want to get on to the other panel. But I just want to mention 5 things. The first point is a very obvious one, but for me it's really the power of the global goals, and that is that we all own them. Every nation is responsible for the delivery of the goals in the nation, but also helping around the world too. And so a large part of my role, as well as working on DFID's core business, is about how we've been working with cabinet members, with government departments to embed the goals in our day-to-day work, in our single departmental plans. And I think that is the power of the goals, that we're all working on the same issues, different challenges facing us, but I think it's a great platform for establishing partnerships, for not having to reinvent the wheel, and really helping other nations to achieve them too. So that's the first point. Secondly, Christine mentioned earlier on, for a number of goals, the amount of money that was required to deliver those key goals that she was focused on. For the whole lot, we are short $2.5 trillion a year. That's the shortfall currently to get us back on track to delivering those goals. So we've got to start doing something differently, and we've got to find a way to really lever in the private sector investment that we need to plug that gap. And the UK, which has a large amount of expertise in innovative financing, new partnerships that we're doing with the City of London and elsewhere, and some great expertise on impact investing, we have started a new, what we're calling a national conversation with investors, with pension funds and others, to look at how we plug that shortfall. And critically, we are also talking to the public as well, and retail banking, and thinking about the sorts of products and opportunities that we can give to savers and pensioners about how their funds can actually give them a great return, but also help deliver the global goals. If we just moved 1% of the money under management in the City of London into Africa, for example, it would have the equivalent effect of more than doubling global aid flows. And we know from our experience with CDC and the other private investment arms that we have that we can get really good returns for that investment. So we're now getting down to the really nitty-gritty, and we're going to unveil some of the findings from this huge project that we're doing at the Africa Invest Summit later this year. And it's really vital that we involve the public. I think there is a huge appetite. I'm thinking about how we can stimulate a savings culture, get young people opening their first ISA account, all those sorts of things, if those products were also helping on issues that they care passionately about too. And of course, it's also about strengthening civil society in many of the nations that we are partnering with. DFID has recently announced new funding, which we're going to be developing new ways of arresting the closure of civil society space. And obviously, this is vital. We have to be holding governments to account. We have to be putting pressure, creating incentives for them to do the right thing. And we're going to be encouraging independent media, supporting civil society, improving data, transparency, and accountability. And finally, because obviously those nations are responsible for their own achievements against those goals, we need to be really supporting those nations to be able to generate their own income. And on average, developing nations collect around 14% GDP in tax revenue. For developed nations, that's around 35%. So if we want people to really start building systems, using those roadmaps that are embedded in the global goals, we need countries to have good tax collection systems and be generating those greater revenues. And so DFID is investing again in this area. Just recently announced a new program of £47 million that's going to be supporting nations do precisely that. So those are just some of the thoughts I hope that will help set a scene. And I hope everyone in this room, as well as whatever hat you're wearing today and whatever brings you here to the World Bank, you're also thinking about what you can do as consumers and what you can do to strengthen civil society space. Thank you.
Many thanks. Very, very helpful, specific suggestions and good encouragement to the people in the room here to seek partnerships. Having said that, I think this panel is a very good demonstration that women, as my daughter is saying, need no empowerment. They have the power, they just need fair and just world, and they will show you how you get them. This doesn't really undermine the great effort by my good friend Sir Suma on what he tried to do, but our Kristalina Georgieva will keep her promise of at least one man at a panel for future engagements. Madam?
Well, this is exactly true. Suma did so well that my pledge not to ever have a panel without at least one man stands.
Thank you, our CEO. Amina, many thanks. Sir Suma, thank you. Madam Minister of Finance, Madam Secretary, thank you all. And now to the next session, and I hope we'll do a better job in timekeeping. Thank you. Thank you, Madam. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. All right. Well done. Thank you. All right. So we'll move fast onto this. We have main speaker, the Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development of the European Commission, Mr. Neven Mimica. Please take the podium. And meanwhile, we'll be joined by Mr. Vitor Gasper, the Director for Fiscal Affairs of the IMF, the Honorable Minister for Investment and International Cooperation of Egypt, Dr. Sahan Nasr. We have as well the Minister of Finance of Guatemala, His Excellency Victor Martinez, and the Vice Minister of Development Cooperation of the Netherlands, Madame Reina Boyes. And we have the Undersecretary for Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations, Mr. Zilman Liu. So we'll start with the Commissioner, and because of the design of this room, I have the counter to my side, not to the side of the speakers. So please help me to reach the end of this session peacefully on time. All right, we start now. Commissioner, please.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Very good afternoon, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. Implementing the 2030 Agenda is our collective responsibility. To succeed, we must translate our ambitious global goals into country-level realities. To overcome poverty and famine, to promote human rights, freedom and democracy, and to safeguard our planet, we must integrate the Sustainable Development Goals into national budgets. In Addis Abeba in 2015, we agreed that the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda, 2030 Agenda, could no longer be ODA-centered agenda. There should be a right mix of ODA, investments, and mobilization of domestic resources. And when it comes to domestic resources, and this is the part I would like to tackle on today, when it comes to domestic resources, it's about engaging domestic resources of all of us, each and every country, because when it comes to sustainability of our development, we are all developing countries. We all have a work to do, and therefore mobilization of domestic resources is for all. So in practice, this means improved public spending and public financial management, transparent and competitive procurement systems, and more efficient investment management from both public and private resources. In line with the European Union's collect more, spend better approach, the European Union promotes reforms for fairer tax policy, better tax collection, and fighting corruption. In parallel, we promote domestic revenue mobilization through our budget support contracts. Under the current 7 years EU budget, we shall disburse 10 billion euros of budget support in 89 countries. This have helped and will help our partners deliver better public services to their citizens. Extreme poverty has halved since 2001 in the countries where we use budget support. And our data shows that these countries achieve higher, much higher poverty reduction rates than the rest. A collect more, spend better approach becomes all the more crucial in situations where debt financing has risen to dangerous levels and calls for greater caution in the future. In conclusion, to navigate today's complex financial landscape, countries need national development plans tailored to their specificities and needs to successfully draw their individual path to sustainable development. This starts by smart, sustainable national budgets supported by better coordinated, more joined-up actions and by all development actors. The European Union stands ready to work with all of you, our partner countries, the World Bank, the IMF and the United Nations in this direction to make poverty a thing of the past. Thank you.
Right, we're not doing bad on time management, and I hope that the rest of the speakers will follow your way of speaking loud, because we are webcasting this session and we're recording it. So, the first speaker on this panel, Vitor Gasper, the Director for the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF. What kind of a challenge you are facing? What are your suggestions to fix it going forward? Vitor.
So thanks, Mahmoud, and thanks for the wonderful collaboration that is ongoing on Sustainable Development Goals, including in the putting together this session. And I look forward to working very closely with you and the World Bank going forward. We have put a staff discussion note of the IMF on sustainable development goals in areas of health, education, and selected aspects of infrastructure, and that has had some impact, and often it is referred as Gaspar and all. That basically means me and others, but it means something very concrete. It means that they have done all the work and they have associated me with that. And they're sitting there, some of them, Mercedes Garcia Escribano, Mauricio Soto, and David Maglobelli. They're the ones who should get the credit. I'm just the spokesperson. You've heard from Minister Sri Mulyani about the success of Indonesia. I think that that is truly inspiring, and it does show how it can be made to work. In our computations, it does come out that Indonesia can do it on the basis of its own resources. Indonesia has put together a comprehensive strategy that delivering inclusive growth will sustain development. But you have other examples. Let me pick Rwanda. In Rwanda, according to our estimates, one needs about 20% of Rwanda GDP in additional spending. Rwanda is a good example of a country that has improved quite substantially governance. They have been able to collect, according to our estimates, 6 additional percentage points of GDP through their own efforts. But a gap remains. Complementarities have to be exploited. Complementarities with the official community, including us, complementarities with the private sector. Clearly, it must be a Rwanda growth and development strategy. Clearly, governance and the impressive progress in Rwanda has to continue, but complementarities have to be exploited, Mahmoud, with the private sector, as you emphasized, and the World Bank is working very actively on, but also the official international community. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Very useful as well, hence to what other speakers on this panel may pick on further on the partnerships with the private sector after fixing the budget and doing the necessary fiscal reforms. So Minister Nasr of Egypt, the Honorable Minister from the UK, mentioned that people may have different hats. You have 2 of them, the Egyptian hat and the African Union hat as well. But you have only 3 minutes to speak on what you are expecting from the international development community to support your implementation for the SDGs, especially the private sector. What are you expecting as well for the African continent going forward?
Thank you, Mahmoud. I first want to start that I tend to agree with your daughter that women don't need any empowerment. We are empowered ourselves.
Thank you.
And we just need to mainstream gender in our national budget. I think that's important. We need equal opportunity, and part of that is our national budgets. But I'll focus on my intervention on the private sector and here and what where the international institutions can help. And I think here I want to highlight 2 main stories. We've been working closely with the bank on budget support, policy loans, and I think these have been very useful in pushing forward reforms that would ensure private sector-led growth and improving the business environment overall. And simultaneously, they've been financing our budget gap, and I think that's very important. In terms of private sector participation, I want to reflect on what Suma has said in the earlier session. We have, in addition to, of course, more transparent and good governance for our national budgets, and after conducting public expenditure review, again with the World Bank, we have been monitoring especially transportation, education, and health sectors, and that has helped a lot in ensuring an efficient use of resources. However, to finance the gap, we've been, in addition to reaching out to our IFIs, we've also promoted private sector investment. We have managed to reform the energy sector and make subsidies more effectively targeted and more transparent, and that helped us bring in the private sector, and that helped us scale up funding from an example that Suma referred to is Bimban, which is the largest solar plant in Africa, which we're very proud of. It's not only creating jobs, it allowed Egypt to export energy to neighboring countries in Africa, moving into green energy, renewable, diversifying our source of energy, but also de-risking through MIGA and other guarantees that help each private sector company to come in. So we've managed to leverage additional funding that did not lead to any additional external debt, because we're working closely also with the IMF and the bank on macro reforms and structure adjustment. And I think that paid off significantly, and I think that is something we are proceeding with other sectors such as ICT and transportation, where we have extensive engagement and we're improving the business environment to attract more private sector in, so that we're able to achieve the global SDGs and achieve sustainable and inclusive growth in Egypt.
Right. To what extent you are sharing this experience with the African countries, and what are you expecting from this chairmanship of the AU?
Yes, on the Egypt's chairmanship of the African Union, priority is infrastructure, renewable energy. That's one priority. Connectivity and mass transportation. So we're looking into railways and the various connectivity roads, so that we're able to promote more investment, more trade. And as discussed this morning in the session that Kristalina mentioned, which is the digital transformation. Yes, digital transformation, because that will allow e-commerce, it will allow e-financing, it will allow a lot of advancement and transformation in health and education, all the various sectors that would help a lagging region really pick up and move fast track.
Thank you. Victor, very quickly, will you see a country like Egypt in your exercise for costing? You did 5 countries. Egypt is not one of them. Will you consider that as being...
So we are engaged in a collaboration with Egypt in terms of trying to help the country building up tax capacity.
Yeah.
In that context, a very important component is to find out what kind of spending is necessary for Egypt to have the budget structure which is necessary for the development of Egypt.
Very good.
So yes.
Yeah, okay. That's the answer I wanted to hear. Thank you. Yes. Minister of Finance of Guatemala, His Excellency Victor Martinez. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, congratulations to the World Bank about this meeting. Thank you, Mahmoud, for coordinating the activity. For us as a country, it's very important to speak about our gap, our financial gap. First of all, we have a huge gap to fill. Our expenditure is about 12% of the GDP, and the last work that the Monetary Fund made is about 8% that is missing for us to achieve the SDGs. So we have in paper the road and the steps that we have to go for it. And first of all, we have to have a better performance of our tax authority. And there we are designing with the Monetary Fund and also with the World Bank a huge investment in capacity, technology, human resources, and process. Actually, also, we are developing some process to have managed the risk of the citizens and contributors. Then also, we are looking forward to have improved sub-control of the VAT complement. The second thing we are very right process is about the improvement of have better expenditure, more transparent, more faster, and more targeted expenditure. The third thing we are working on is to mobilize the private investment to public sector, public services and infrastructure. And then is tax revenue. We have to talk about the taxes. We have to talk about everyone have to pay and to have the complement to become right in the culture of law. Then of this strategy, we have a full commitment to discuss with the citizens, because we are sure that we have to make some commitment, make the engagement, not only with the authorities, but with other people. And then we began about 3 years ago to have discussing, because the people have to know the SDGs. And then we approve the SDGs in decentralized authorities and communities. And then we have some focus on aligned investment. In Guatemala, we have some investment portfolio, and with the community together, we decide to focus and align in 5 categories. First, health, education, water, sanitation, and infrastructure. It's about the first step to invest about $200 million per year since 2016.
Excellent, and I saw Victor smiling because the areas that you mentioned, Minister, are among the 5 areas of focus of the IMF costing exercise: education, health, and the 3 areas of transport, of infrastructure that you mentioned, including water, energy, and transport. So I think that is a good example for the other countries as well, who are encouraged to get the costing right. Right, let's go to the Netherlands. Very well known to us in a variety of partnerships. The Queen Maxima, have been always a champion of financial inclusion. You have very able private sector companies who have been doing good job in the sustainability. And we have as well good warning from your statistical commission that we don't really know what we should know when it comes to indicators, even with the sophistication that you have with the statistical authority. So tell me what the Netherlands can do for the world. I don't think that you're expecting much from the rest of the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mahmoud. It's really a pleasure to be here and to talk about, and I would say, with the SDGs, because SDGs are a common language. Understanding each other through SDGs, I think, has increased our cooperation. And I think, particularly because of this common language, is a very powerful tool for these new partnerships that we really need to unlock new resources and also innovations for the benefit of all. For us, the SDGs count both at home, domestically, as for our international cooperation. And we do have our own homework to do in the Netherlands. We yearly take stock of where we are, and we have problems in our carbon footprint, and we do have to do a lot better on SDG 5, gender. Globally, the SDGs are our central framework for the foreign trade and development cooperation. And we see that all the SDGs are interconnected. For instance, investing in education and youth employment is an investment in all SDGs. And for that, the taxation, the domestic resource mobilization in countries is of course key. And that's what we support. And that's why we think the World Bank does play a very important role to support countries to raise the taxes, and we are happy to support this work of the World Bank. Coming back to achieving SDG 4, I think it's instrumental for achieving many of the SDGs. It's about quality education, and that's why we are engaged in setting up this new instrument, financing instrument for education. We discussed it this morning with a broad group of partners, and we really hope that that will bring prospects for a large population of youth that we all have. Because it's not only about education, but training in a way that prepare them to be able to find the right jobs, to have the right skills, to be able to work in the digitalized world, and really play their part for the future in their countries. So that's what we think we can support, and we really want to contribute and work with all partners, private, public, and civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vita?
It's a very specific question. I was very interested in what you said about the financing instrument for education. Could you just say a little bit more?
Yes, it's working with the multilateral development banks and trying to make from each dollar $4. That's a new mechanism where we as donors not only put money in it, but also have guarantees so that the multilateral development banks can lend to the countries, particularly the lower middle income countries, to have better investments in the education sector.
Right, thank you so much. $1 or €1 from you to generate 4. This is going beyond Dutch. That's a very good example on how to get things done. I think some in the room would say that their leveraging capacity is high, but not that high. Anyway, we'll be quite happy to see how that works. And now with the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Dinman Liu. And then I will not be leaving the stage. You will be staying here, but I'll be with you just there because we have 3 respondents to what you have said and others, and perhaps they have their own views and arguments to share with you. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahmoud. I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I have 4 brief points. First, let me use this opportunity to invite you to take a look of this report, Financing for Sustainable Development Report 2019. This report has a full review of the financial for development scenarios and provides a comprehensive policy advice on all the issues, as well as the advice for creating an enabling international environment for financing for development. This report is a joint product by the Interagency Task Force, which I have the honor to chair, and which includes over 60 agencies, both from within the UN and outside UN system, including World Bank, IMF, WTO, OECD, and UNCTAD, I think UNDP, a number of important agencies. Second, let me say it be, on the issue of the national budget, definitely national public budget is extremely important and critical for ensuring the delivery of the 2030 agenda. For example, on education and on public health, I think the national budget could really provide public goods for those issues. Also, I think national budget could provide incentives for private sector by either encouraging or discouraging the use of fossil fuels. So it's a public budget is very crucial, very crucial. Third, I think actually when we are also promoting attracting the private sector investment, we need to see it be how to create an enabling environment that remains a big issue for all member states and for all the international agencies. When we are revisiting the current international structure, I think that many challenges, including the illicit inflow of capitals and the international tax system, we need to improve the international tax system, definitely. I think there's a United Nations International Tax Committee. They are doing a lot. We think we need to make good use of that committee. Fourth point, I want to say that I appreciate this. We started the talk in the year of 2019 on financing for development. We should continue next week in New York at the United Nations ECOSOC Financing for Development Forum. Then we are going to continue discussion in July and during ECOSOC, and in September during we have 3 big events on the issue. First is the ICG Summit. Second is Secretary General's Climate Summit. Fourth one, high-level review, high-level dialogue on finance for development. I hope you will be, after this meeting, you will join us in New York for the continued discussion on finance for development. I thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Many thanks. Can you show us the cover of that report, if you can hold the report? Yes, show it to the cameras, because we have few hundred. Yes, yeah, we have a bigger one. Yeah, this is a nice cover.
There are some copies in the room behind. You could pick up it.
There are some copies, and here it tells you something about watering the roots through good finance. And then these are the SDGs, and I'm not quite sure if these are the low-hanging fruits or what. But, well, good innovation in the cover. Thank you so much for that. Again, another round of applause for this fantastic panel, who remain seated, please, for traffic management. And then I have 3 distinguished respondents from Colombia first, and then we'll hear from the rest. We have Ms. Gloria Alonso, the Director of the National Planning Department of Colombia. Yeah, if you can stand, please, and if you can face the camera, because others are watching while you speak. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go this way for you to look at the camera.
Thank you very much. I think that most of the important challenge that we face is how to protect the budget to guarantee a long investment in social but also in physical capital for the 2030. In other words, how to accomplish the SDGs in the face of decelerating fiscal and economic scenario. One way is to keep track of different public resources. For example, in Colombia, the main sources for financing SDGs is public spending. Between the year 2015 and the year 2017, the investment come from the general budget of the nation. And it was allocated towards achievement of the SDGs to an average of 4% of GDP. And the subnational level, public investment in education, healthcare, clean water, and sanitation, the amount of investment was about like 4% of GDP. So in that sense, I think that the most important issue is how to put SDGs into action by take care of the confidence of the private sector in a long-term way. It should be with a fiscal capacity, fiscal institutional arrangement is the most important issue, at the same time with macroeconomic stability. And I can say that Colombia has shown for a long term this economic soundness. It comes from 3 pillars, from external, from monetary, and also from fiscal sustainability. It guaranteed the long-term stability. It has been the most important to get the confidence from the private, internal, and external investment in the long way. This is, for me, the most important issue to allocate the budget to accomplish the SDGs in order to get this poverty reduction to the 2030 year.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your intervention. Colombia is one of the most fascinating cases of development during the last 30 years. You transformed your country from being fragile and in conflict to one of the OECD member countries. You showed us how can you do localization right, get the data right. You even endorsed the SDGs before they were formally launched. So I hope that we have many countries like Colombia, especially those who are suffering from fragility and conflict. Madam Gwen Hines, you were at the board of the bank for many years. You put us on track through your forward look and your good way of encouraging the rest of the board to reach points of agreement. I bet if you are doing that kind of fantastic job at Save the Children, many children will be saved. But tell us how.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mahmoud. So I was indeed at the World Bank board when the SDGs were agreed. So 4 years on, it's fantastic to see the strong commitment and particularly the partnership, because of course that's one of the really key issues there. I'd also like to second what Amina Mohammed said about the youth. When we talk about the SDGs, it's not just their future, but they're also part of the solution. And maybe, like your daughter, we need to get out of the way. We need support to encourage the youth to come up with the ideas on the issues which we failed on for decades. But the key message I have for you today, we've talked a lot about more money. My message is, let's follow the money. Let's see where the money's going and what it's achieving. When we also agree the SDGs, the principle no one has mentioned so much yet today is leave no one behind. That was a firm commitment to put those furthest behind first, between countries, within countries. This is the right thing to do, morally. We know the bottom 20% of children are twice as likely to die before their 5th birthday. That cannot be right in the 21st century. But it's also the smart thing to do. The Human Capital Index shows us that investments in children, investments in youth are critically important. And if we're serious about the SDGs, we have to focus on convergence. We know by 2030, 4 million children will still die a year. And what's more, they'll die from causes we know how to prevent now. So with your help, by getting on board, we could save 4 million children and many other things we could do. So we want your partnership for that. So how do we do it? We follow the money. We have to look below the national level. We have to look which sectors, which regions, which groups are not benefiting. It's tough, but we can do it in partnership. We've mapped it for Kenya, for Indonesia. And many of the regions with the highest burden are those receiving the lowest resources. So let's work on this together. It's tough, but the SDGs are tough. So as Suma said, let's get serious about more money, but let's also get serious about following the money and accelerating the impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, another example of good work and coordination among the business community, the leadership of Kedir Ren, of Japan, and the B20. We need to hear from you, what do you mean really by Society 5.0? How can that help us getting to achieve the goals and targets of sustainable development? Mr. Ishiro Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Mohirudin. Last month, we at Kedir Japan Business Federation hosted the B20 Tokyo Summit, where the joint recommendations entitled Society 5.0 for SDGs were adopted. We had the pleasure of the company of Mr. Mohirudin as panelists there. Society 5.0 is our vision of a future society aiming at achieving the SDGs by making the most of cutting-edge technologies such as artificial intelligence. The joint recommendations urge businesses to work out business voluntary action plan, including, among other things, realizing sustainable economic growth and providing solutions to social issues through innovation. Taking this opportunity, I, representing the B20, would like host countries to allocate public budget, in particular when private investment cannot be incentivized or is not available for commercial reasons. In other words, to spend better. In order to mobilize private finance, including from institutional investors, we also expect host countries to ensure profitability through a significant enhancement of project preparation and post-implementation analysis, leading to an effective risk reduction and appropriate risk sharing. Good governance, in short. Moreover, we expect the G20 to improve international financial networks and regulations to support long-term investments, such as through encouraging the collaboration among regulators and private sectors and addressing regulatory and reporting constraints to achieve the SDGs. In a nutshell, public-private collaboration cannot be too much emphasized. We, the B20, urge businesses to integrate the SDGs into corporate strategies, and at the same time expect governments to integrate the SDGs into national budgets? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now with Ambassador Marc-André Blanchard, and again, in a nutshell, more on the role of the private sector and finance. Ambassador Blanchard have been supporting the work of FFD in different capacity. So, sir, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Mahmoud. So I have the privilege of being the reporter for this great luncheon that we had, where, according to the treasurer of the World Bank, there were more than $23 trillion of institutional investors and investors represented in the room, with people from DFIs and MDBs and the UN and everywhere, and also academic institutions. What was said? Well, it's Chatham House rule. I cannot say exactly who said what, but let me just give you a summary. First, to achieve SDGs, the good news, everybody agreed that to achieve SDGs, to be successful, we have enough global capital in the world available. The second great admission that was made was that risk of not achieving the SDGs is existential for institutional investors and for the sustainability of their portfolios. That's a huge admission. Possible to do more business with better product while doing good. Another good point. To fill the investment gap, there's a need to unlock institutional capital. We won't get there if we don't unlock institutional capital. It's possible, but we need to convince the skeptics. And there are a lot of them out there. The problem is that still too often, we do not speak the same language. We now need to become bilingual fast. We need to speak, on one hand, the financial language, like the financial community, and then we need also to speak finance like the development community. And it is important that public sector, including the MDBs, better understand the private sector. It is important for the public sector to also understand the timeline of the private sector. The private sector acts way faster than the public sector, and also way faster than the NDBs. So we need to act faster altogether. We need to mainstream products like green and blue bonds, because once the system will consider them mainstream, investors will move fast. Many mentioned that small, concrete, practical steps and partnerships will make a huge difference. Let's not underestimate that. Many also added that it is essential to share examples. Then there were mentions about the urgency to bring in the financial mainstream, the 1.7 billion people that are currently outside the financial mainstreams. Some mentioned that getting technology in play in parts of the world is the biggest stumbling block in many cases. Also, we have heard about the importance of digitalization in Africa. Madame Georgieva talked about it, but many reminded us that there will be no digitalization without access to energy for more than 1 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa. Then some countries represented mentioned that policies matter. One very successful frontier market economy mentioned that there is a strong relationship between the business regulatory framework, environment, and private investment. Many states mentioned positive experiences about PPP in infrastructure. Some countries and MDBs and DFIs mentioned the necessity to make sure that we have developed capital markets locally to ensure that investment can flow in the frontier markets. And some said that the development of capital markets is often or too often neglected by the traditional development approach. We need to ensure that capacity exists locally to ensure that projects can be bankable and taken to markets. And finally, that was my 3-minute speech. I'll now quote him because he's a friend, and I'm sure he won't be mad at me, but I'll give you the 15-second version. Matthew Rycroft is the permanent secretary of DFED in the UK, and he summarized the meeting in saying, well, I understand from the meeting that we ought to put the SDG stamps on everything we do in the public and in the private sector. Second, make sure that we all understand that we need to make sustainability profitable as a second point. And the third point, we all have to feel the urgency to act and the urgency to scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You summarized it well. Nobody can do it better. And now let's see how can we translate that into action, and nobody else in the bank can do it better than our Vice President, who is responsible for Equitable Growth, Finance and Institution, our good friend and co-sponsor of this event, Jayla Pazar-Basioglu. Please go ahead, Madam.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Thank you, and I just want to be brief. We have heard a lot about numbers. We also had recently published as the bank Beyond the Gap, the measures for infrastructure-related SDGs. We need something between 640 billion to 2.5 trillion. These are huge numbers, and it's very costly to be able to finance the SDG investments and goals. But I think what we need to be aware of is there are things we can do. And if I can leave one message with you, and that is to really achieve the SDGs, this is a policy choice. It's a policy choice at the national, regional, and the global level. And we all have to do our work. Countries need to do reforms, and we as the bank and other IFIs are there to support those reforms. Because at the end of the day, as we heard from Minister Nasser, reforms help increase efficiencies and reduce costs. So we need good reforms. We need targeted policies for the poor. Trickle-down doesn't work. So we need targeted pro-poor policies. And thirdly, we have to work on domestic resource mobilization. We need to make sure that countries are able to raise taxes, but also we have to make sure, as the global community, that we bring in the private sector to help finance the SDGs. And that's only going to happen if we have reforms, if we have transparency and efficiency at the country level and the regional level. Spring meetings have been great. I always say we at the bank have a very inspiring mandate. It inspires me to come through these doors. If you come in from the entrance, it says, our dream is to end poverty. And we're not going to reach that dream unless we focus on reforms, we focus on transparency and efficiency, and we need the private sector and the public sector to help finance them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, to conclude this lovely session with many good messages, we have the Vice President of the EIB, again, a former board member of the World Bank Group. I'm very happy that many of the key board members are in key positions to help us doing good work through partnerships. So it doesn't really need interpretation of things that we do when it comes to good partners like you, Fayoli. Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud. You have already taken off my time.
No, we can't start to recount. He has been almost like that at the board. Please.
I don't need the 3 minutes anyway.
The 3 minutes starts now. Please go ahead.
No, thank you so much. And this was really a fascinating lunch. I agree with you, Ambassador. It was a very, very interesting session this afternoon. I would just like to take 3 messages. One that has been stressed by Suma, we are off track to reach the SDGs. And what it means for us, public financial institutions and the private sector, is that we need to do more. And to do more, we need to use whatever you call it, de-risking, leveraging, crowding in, all of these that will allow, thanks to the support from public institutions, to get more private resources to finance the SDGs. The second thing is we need to be innovative. What Sri Mulyani said about the funding part of financing SDGs is very interesting. We do the same on the public institutions, on green bonds, on what we have launched on sustainable awareness bonds, on water projects, these kind of things. We really need to be more innovative. We need to use also the technologies that allows that to happen. For example, in Ethiopia, we are financing a project that will allow mobile technologies to pay for transactions in rural areas. That is something so important in countries where the banking access is low. And finally, I think we need to work more together. And we do that among public institutions. We do that, of course, with the European Commission. We do that with the World Bank Group. But we need to do more and also to work more with partner countries. This is the role that the country strategies are going to look at in the G20. We need to do that also with the private sector. And that will be important also to help other aspect of this, which is related to the regulatory framework, for example, key for some investments, or also to develop technical assistance capacity building. That is also going to be very important if we want to have long-lasting reforms. And I will stop here.
Excellent. With these insightful concluding remarks, we end this session that is going to be with some summaries in the future, so please follow up our website. The recording will be available. Some practical solutions will be shared. Many thanks to you, Vitor, for your excellent work with your team. Many thanks to Jaylan and her team for the great collaboration. Honorable ministers, the head of UNDESA, our good friend and ambassador, not just in the UN, but in the world of development and finance. Many thanks. But in another session, very soon, we are going to be not talking about government, budget reforms and business, but with many inspiring hints of the panelists today, will be bringing the missing third pillar, the society. And it's not just about the women and the young women who need no empowerment, but there are many active, energetic, and inspiring people in the society who need to be linked, not through the traditional NGOs and CSOs, but to be given a fair chance. They need no gifts from anybody. They need nothing but stopping the injustice and having a fair playing field. And then with that, we can really reach a world with dignity for all. Thank you so much.